and a record retained on the Council website. For those at home viewing the webcast, I would like to inform you that if you look at the video, you will see a Resources tab. Select this, and a link to the agenda will appear in the right-hand side. This will allow you to open the agenda in PDF form and follow the discussion and debate. We have one apology so far. Councillor Andy Corkhill will be deputised by Councillor Allan Brame. Thank you, Allan. Do we have any other apologies? No, thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest? Thank you. So this brings us to the minutes of our last meeting. The minutes can be found on pages 1 to 14 of your agenda pack, and we have to approve the accuracy of the minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of March 2021. Does anyone have any comments regarding the minutes? No. I have two concerns which I'd just like to note. The first is regarding the Hoylake Beach Management Update, which is on pages 12 and 13 of the minutes in this meeting's agenda pack. And I've already discussed with the team, we'll need to amend the minutes regarding the vote on this, which if people watch the recording of the last meeting, they will see that we did not agree recommendation 3 regarding Appendix C. We amended that section, which should in fact read as was read out at the time and was typed in the chat of the Teams meeting before the vote. I'll just read it again so that people can remind themselves. It was item 14, Hoylake Beach, and it was the third recommendation, which was amended to approve the submission to Natural England of a plan to manage wind-blown sand at Hoylake Beach and a corresponding habitats regulations assessment in consultation with the Coastal Advisory Group of Regional Beach Management and Ecology. This group of experts has already been established and officers have met with them previously. They are prepared to give Wirral Council expert advice free of charge and could save council taxpayers money, possibly reducing the need for expensive consultants in future. Can we agree to amend the minutes here to accurately reflect the meeting decision as can be seen in the recording? Okay. Take that as agreed. Thank you. So it's caused quite a significant delay in setting up the Coastal Advisory Group, and that will need to meet urgently now if we are to abide by that vote from the last meeting. So I'd just like to put on record that we are asking the officers to set up a meeting with the Coastal Advisory Group as soon as possible in line with the vote at the meeting in March. Thank you. My second concern regarding the minutes can wait until we reach the work programme, as the minutes themselves are wholly accurate and do reflect the meeting and the vote right at the end of that meeting. It is the work programme for this meeting which does not reflect that and will need further investigation. So we can refer to that at the end of this meeting. This brings us on to public and member questions, which is item number 5. We have received 2 questions, and each questioner has 2 minutes to read their question and must not deviate from the original question. I'd like to invite Charlotte Smith to present her question. Charlotte, you have 2 minutes.
Can you hear me now? Okay, great. Well, good evening, everybody. My name's Charlotte. I live in Hoylake, and I have submitted a question for you all tonight. My main question is as follows. Access to Hoylake Beach via the slipways is severely restricted by the build-up of grass, weeds, dandelions, and watercress. This is particularly noticeable at King's Gap entrance to Hoylake Beach and the old lifeboat slipway, with excess sand blocking safe access to the beach. Wirral Council is in breach of the Equality Act 2010, which will be Section 149, Schedule 12, with regards to by not providing safe access to the beach for disabled people, myself included, which is basically access to goods and services. Will the environmental chair commit to legal obligations by clearing all the slipways to allow safe access immediately within the next month or within an agreed timescale? That's my main question.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you. I'd like to thank you for your observations regarding Kings Gap Slipway and the slipway at Alderley Road. For information, the slipways do not form part of the adopted highway and therefore do not have the same maintenance standards as exist for an actual highway. The slipways act as an interface between the natural and man-made environments, and users are made aware of the hazards present through the adjacent signage. This is the standard approach taken at all locations on the Wirral coast. The slipways are all inspected regularly. The most recent inspection on the 2nd of June 2021 identified that whilst sand and some vegetation growth at Kings Gap Slipway was observed, the conditions on the slipway were similar to those that would be encountered on the foreshore. I do agree with you that disabled access should be a priority, and we as a council voted to aim for blue flag status on our beaches. This will require us to ensure that we have good quality disabled access, and I am sure this will inform our plans when we reach that stage of the engagement and consultation process. Officers have assessed your allegation, and in their view, they do not believe that the council has breached the Equality Act 2010. The build-up of sand will continue to be reviewed during future inspections. However, we are currently unable to remove or move any sand on the foreshore as we no longer have permission from Natural England to do this. A new application for assent with supporting habitat regulations assessment is being prepared for submission to Natural England. We need to do this as Hoylake Beach forms part of the North Wirral Foreshore Site of Special Scientific Interest. Basically, we need permission to move sand. Thank you. Would you like to ask your supplementary question?
Yeah, by all means. With regard to my supplementary question, will the Chair agree to designate a section of Hoylake Beach to be made available for local events to be exempted from SSI restrictions, which you've already mentioned, to continue on the beach, such as the tug of war, bonfire night and the volleyball team locally, so that organisers can make the area safe for recreational use? Natural England has stated, after all, that an amenity beach can be raked. And if you look at the Natural England documents at the bottom of it, it does say that provision can be made for an amenity beach locally. And obviously, events like the tug of war, bonfire night, does bring in money for local organisations such as the local sailing club. Hoylake Lifeboat is another such organisation, and it would be beneficial for the local economy as well. And those events have been taking place for decades, and at the moment they can't take place. So if the Chair could respond to that, please. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Charlotte. I'm glad you referred to the Natural England report and to their references to an amenity beach, and I would urge all interested parties to read that Natural England report, especially the references to an amenity beach, which you do seem to have interpreted differently from most other people. Natural England is the government's statutory nature conservation advisor and is responsible for enforcing laws that protect wildlife and the natural environment, which includes North Wirral Foreshore Site of Special Scientific Interest, covering Hoylake Beach. As such, Wirral Council has no powers to exempt areas of the SSSI from the regulations that cover it. Permission must be sought from Wirral Council for any activities which have the capacity to harm the SSSI. And before the Council grants permission, they must in turn obtain consent from Natural England, having assessed any requests in accordance with the Conservation of Habitats and Species Regulations 2010. Thank you again, Ms Smith, for your questions. Thank you. We do have another question, and the questioner is not able to be here. The questioner is Gillian Homery, and she has asked if we can present her question on her behalf. I believe Gillian is watching, so I'd like to thank you, Gillian, for your question. The question is, could you please confirm that when deciding the future of Hoylake Beach, this council will stick to the science and the evidence and not be swayed by negative campaigning and bombardment from those who wish to ignore the facts and mislead the public? Can you promise to abide by the advice of Natural England and do what's right by the people of Wirral in an environment and climate emergency, and protect both nature and residents from the threats they face? So in response, thank you, Gillian. Hoylake Beach is changing naturally and is becoming increasingly difficult for it to be effectively managed as it was in a way that would gain assent from Natural England. The Council, as landowner, also has a statutory duty to further the conservation and enhancement of the SSSI. Through the work we are doing and with the findings of the independent ecology and geomorphology study later in the year, combined with public consultation, we will find the most effective solution, taking into account advice already received from Natural England and the regulations in place to protect the SSSI, to manage Hoylake Beach in the long term. So I'd like to thank you both for your questions. Thank you. We now move on to statements and petitions.
Chair. Sorry, am I allowed to ask for clarification on your answers, just so that I understand them?
No, if you want to, you can get in touch afterwards and we'll sort that out
Thank
in
you.
writing. We move on to statements and petitions. There is a 3-minute time limit for statements and petitions and no response is required. I'd like to invite Alex Lomas to present a petition on traffic control in Alfred Road, Oxton.
Good evening, everyone. I'm here representing the families and residents of Alfred Road in Oxton. Over the past 2 years, we've seen the number of cars, vans, and even HGVs using our residential street as a thoroughfare increase tenfold to avoid the lights on Oxton Road. A major catalyst, we believe, was the building of the Lidl supermarket, which is situated on the crossroads of Balls Road and Oxton Road. The street has become home to a growing number of families over the past few years. It changed from predominantly being flats before. Those families have children at toddler age and school children age, and we strongly believe that if we don't act soon, there could be disastrous consequences, as the speeding traffic travelling down the road is, in our opinion, a critical point and needs to be addressed. Following a number of near misses and numerous damaged vehicles on the street, I decided it was time that I reached out to the residents and we set up a petition and of a street of approximately 24 houses. I think it speaks in volumes that there's over 46 supporters, that everyone had the same growing concerns. We'd love for our street to be considered for a pilot for the low traffic neighbourhood or play street scheme. A simple bollard at one end would cost very little, but would transform our street and the lives of the families and the children. I've seen this happen in many other parts of the country, but unfortunately in Wirral it seems it's very slow for it to happen. And I'd like to ask, could we please have a bollard? Thank you for your time, and I really hope you're able to help us. We're relying on your support and help for the safety of our families and our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lomas. Thank you. I'll ensure that you get a full response for that. This committee does take road safety very seriously, and we'll always try to support any move to improve safety of residents, so thank you. This brings us on to questions by members, and we've not received any questions by members, so we can move on to agenda item 6, which is the car parking charges option report, and this can be found on pages 15 to 36 of your agenda pack. I'd like to invite Nikki Butterworth, who's the Director of Neighbourhood Services, to present this report. Thanks, Nikki.
Thank you, Chair and members. So this report follows on from the full council meeting of the 1st of March earlier this year, when the council's budget was set for 21-22. One element of that budget was unanimously agreed was £1 million savings to be met from additional and increased parking charges and a whole-scale car parking review. The whole-scale car parking review is part of a transport and parking strategy study commissioned by the Director of Regeneration, which will report later this year. In the meantime, this committee is required to agree a means of generating the £1 million budget saving agreed by Council. This report sets out officers' recommendations for a range of budget options for consideration by the committee. These recommendations also follow on from earlier committee workshop sessions on the budget. To draw your attention to the recommendations within the report, the committee are asked to consider to 1. Ensure that the Environment, Climate Emergency and Transport Committee fulfills its obligations as agreed at the meeting of full council on the 1st of March, that the committee are recommended to choose from various parking charges. The options are all set out in Appendix 3 of your report packs in order to meet the agreed £1 million budget saving as part of the 21-22 annual budget. And that also the committee delegates authority to the Director of Neighbourhood Services to implement the decision of this committee, and that parking charges options selected as soon as reasonably practicable. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikki. Do we have any comments or questions on Nikki's report?
Chair, thank you. A little disappointed with the wording of the introduction, I have to say. I'm sorry. The budget that was voted through, the wording in the budget motion is, and I'll read it word for word. It doesn't make sense, but I'll read it word for word. It is proposed that a wide-ranging and review of car parking charges, looking at options to increase, and it goes on. I question whether this document is a wide-ranging review. I know the chair's a teacher. I think if I was a teacher and someone had proposed this to me, I'd have said, take it away and bring it back with some more information, please. What we've got is an under fives proposal. We've got, let's add 20p, let's add 50p, let's add £1. What I'm struggling with, I have no information about which cars stay for which period of time and the breakdown of that. And based on that, I think you could have a sensible discussion about which car parks, which charges you were looking at introducing. But this provides none of that. This provides a, let's add 50p or £1, a flat rate. And that's not acceptable. That is not acceptable. I could go through it. It's proposed as a fait accompli that we are to fulfil our obligations. Well, our obligations are to, as it says, to produce a wide-ranging review. Not necessarily at this meeting, put up charges. We need a wide-ranging review.
Thank you. Simon, have you finished? Or is
No,
there more?
I've got a few more words if you don't mind. Actually, do you know what? I'm going to leave it there for now, if you don't mind. And if anyone else would like to speak, I might come back afterwards. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Can I just clarify that you did see the report that went to committee, the working party on parking charges, and that you did see all the documents that led up to that budget decision, because there were quite a number of different options that we already discussed and debated before we made the full council decision. Just check that you did.
Yeah, sorry, I have. Did I miss the part that spoke about the timings of how long people stay in the car parks?
It was about the different types of charges and the different scenarios.
There was no information about how long each car stays, I don't think, was there, Chair?
So that's what you want, about how long each car stays?
Was there that information in the report?
Not in the original report before we went to council.
No, thank you.
Does anybody else have any comments? Councillor Cooke.
So can you hear me? Yes, sorry, it's just Councillor Mountney, yes. I'm just wondering why you're raising the particular question about the duration of cars staying in car parks. I don't see the relevance. Obviously, there's there already exists a charging regime for cars depending on how long they stay in car parks, and that isn't being done away with, according to any of the proposals here. So I'm just interested in if you could clarify the reason why you're bringing that point up now.
Simon, do you want to answer the question? You can answer.
Chair, because it would allow us to make an informed decision, or allow people to make an informed decision.
Can we just clarify the precise, this is really important, what we're talking about is clearly very, very important. Can we just clarify exactly what it is that you want, and maybe we can find that information?
Sorry, well, the information is not in the report, is it? So it's not here this evening.
Can you just remind us what exactly it is that you do want to be in the report?
When people attend a car park, let's take the pre-meeting that we had, the car park, the little car park in Irby was discussed. Now, the little car park in Irby, I don't know whether people go there and park for an hour to buy a pint of milk, or they go there and park all day and then get on a bus and go to Liverpool to work. I have no idea. But if people were to provide me with the length of time that cars stay in that car park, we could make a better informed decision. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Just to go back to Chris's point, sorry, I'll bring Steve in. Just to go back to Chris's point, Chris did just point out that we do have a time-based charging approach across the borough. So you pay for an hour, you pay for 2 hours, you pay for 3 hours, or you pay for all day.
I understand that, but that information is not in this report. I've no idea how many cars stay for an hour or how many cars stay for all day. I know people buy tickets for their length of stay, but the report doesn't contain if a car stays for an hour or for 5 hours.
Okay, thank you. Steve?
I think what we're seeing is an abdication of responsibility from the group opposite, clearly trying to confuse the matter. It's fairly clear that the car parking charges are based around an hour stay, and even the submission of if someone went in for a pint of milk in the shop. Well, part of the reason why car parking charges are effective is that journey shouldn't be made by a car. That journey would be someone walks, gets a pint of milk and goes home if they're living local. So, you know, how can you go into the minutiae of who stays where for what? I think one of the options in there is a fairly understandable standardisation of what the car parking charges are. And I've always believed simplicity is the key to communication. And if that policy is there, everybody on the Wirral will know what they are expected to pay for that length of time. So, you know, they might chance it and nip in for a pint of milk, wherever it may be. You know, that is sort of, it's paving the way to follow up from what was released, what I've read in the press, and I don't always believe what I've read in the press, is that we're quite clearly going to see one group on this committee tonight abdicate their responsibility. Now, we could all throw our hands up and say, pass it back on to P&R, but that's not what the committee system was about, was it? Wasn't the committee system about giving responsibility to ordinary members to do work on stuff, to actually make hard, tough decisions or make a decision? I think what we'll see tonight is you know, bluff and bluster and an abdication of responsibility. Now, I don't particularly like engaging in putting charges on anything. Most people know my history of low council tax and when I was leader. So I actually know that this decision, and it's in the papers, was given the full backing of full council by every single party in the council. We never had that before. We've never had a unanimous budget decision, but we've got one. And our job now is to implement the democratic will of all the parties of the council as a committee. Accept that responsibility, as difficult as it is, or hide behind minutiae and pretend to the public, well, we never voted for that, we never did that. So I'll be interested to see and there are a choice of options within the report that give us some room for flexibility or some room to manoeuvre. Also, it refers in the report, little or nothing has been done on car parking charges since 2017. Now, I know from travelling around from Southport to Liverpool to other places, our parking charges are comparable, if not lower, than most other authorities. We also have the added burden of a budget deficit and a predicted budget deficit that we need to solve. We also have the MCLG, if I've got the abbreviation correct, who have helped us out with a loan, and they will be expecting us to make responsible decisions based on the real world. Now, car parking charges exist for a number of reasons. To deter car usage is only one part of them. The other part is to actually manage car parks. If you have no charging, then, as you say, they could fill up with people all day, every day. And that is the detriment to business because there's no turnover of customers. They go past. If they can't park, they go past. So you do need a turnover of people in car parking charges are a method of managing car parks. So my view is that I think we have to come to an agreement. It'd be nice if all parties could get behind it and be honest with the public and say, yeah, we do need to increase car parking charges, and this is how we're going to do it, and this is the simple formula that you can understand. But I'll hopefully, Councillor Mountney has got options that he prefers, and he can, and his group can tell us about them. But at this point in time, we have to make difficult decisions, or refer to P&R, which is effectively going back to the cabinet system, isn't it? You know, not our responsibility to send it on to someone else or someone else to do. So that's a position we find ourselves in. But I'm very interested to see what else other council have got to say.
Thanks, Steve. I do agree with you. Councillor Mountney, you've got your finger on the buzzer.
Yeah, Chair. No one on this side of the committee room is afraid of making decisions, and we are quite clear what the options are. The point is, at this meeting, we don't have enough information to make a decision. It's a straight under fives proposal. Let's put 50p or £1 on the car parking charges. There's no information about which car parks provide the income, which length of stay provides the best income, how we do that mix. There is, I'm sure, there is some kind of algorithm that would produce this for us, but we don't seem to have opted for that. We seem to have made a straight, let's add 50p. It's under fives maths. It's ridiculous. I was at a meeting the other day where people voted for things without information. And one of the reasons I wanted to discuss with the chair about something was that we need joined up thinking here. We can't just sit here, and Steve, I hear what you say about P&R, and you're saying that we perhaps are abrogating responsibility. No, I don't think we are. What we're saying is you have better knowledge than we do over all these subjects, and perhaps that's the best way to make this decision. Not just to say, oh, it's my decision, let's make it. If you're not armed with the information, then don't make the decision. Pass it to someone better informed who makes a better decision for the residents of this borough.
Councillor Mountney, thank you. On pages 27 and 28 and 29 and 30, there is quite a bit of information about the different car parks and how much money each car park brings in. You're saying that that's not enough information for you? So there is information about the income for each car park in the report?
Chair, I say again, there is no information, and you keep saying this, there is no information about the length of stay of each car in each car park. Now, you're quite right. When somebody buys a ticket, they buy it for an hour. So we know how many cars in that car park have stayed for an hour. We also know how many cars have stayed for 2 hours. That information is not in this report. That information is critical when you're making decisions
Can I ask why that information is critical? Because it doesn't seem critical to most other people. Can I ask why you think that information is critical? Because I'm beginning to worry that this is, as has been suggested, just an excuse not to make a decision tonight.
Chair,
if you could, I'd be very grateful if you could explain
Sure.
to everybody why
Chair,
that information is critical.
Have you read the report?
Of course, I've read the report.
The report quite clearly says that car parking and town centre spend is not about the cost of the car park, it's about availability of spaces, and people stay based on their availability of spaces. That's why I'm asking the question.
So if that particular option, the town centre option, were not on the table, you would be minded to vote for the other options, perhaps? Okay, I'm just trying to clarify as chair. Thank you. Does anybody else have any comments to make about this? Or any questions? Alan?
Thank you, Chair. For a series of historic reasons, our charges for car parking are a complicated dog's breakfast of different rates, often with seemingly no rational reason for the different costs or why it's free to park in one location but not another. And it seems to me we've got an opportunity to rationalise this. I suppose you could say it's never the ideal moment to introduce wholesale changes, and it is unfortunate that the car parking study that's being undertaken by Regeneration, that's referred to in paragraph 3.9, won't be reporting until September. But ideally, we would want to take into account the findings of that report. But at the same time, pushing us in the opposite direction is the decision imposed upon us by Budget Council to generate this extra £1 million from car parking in this financial year. And Chair, I have to say that having studied the various options, that target looks extremely challenging, which is probably a polite way of saying unachievable. While there are a number of options, it fundamentally boils down to a choice between loading ever higher costs onto people who use our existing car parks and off-street parking areas, or spreading the burden more widely by introducing charges in some areas that have traditionally been free. And of course, the introduction of a standard rate would provide winners and losers, but it's a more equitable starting point. Every area that finds itself selected for new charges is going to be unhappy. We know that. They may argue that they are a special case, that they should be exempt. For example, the Brome shopping area, and I'm sure Councillor Williams would know this, would find business perhaps driven away across Newchester Road to the Croft Shopping Centre, where parking is free. In delegating this decision to officers, I would expect them to weigh up these issues very carefully, and others which are obviously going to emerge during the consultation. One option which I may have missed, but I don't think is in the report, would be perhaps to introduce an hour's free parking in these areas. That would ensure the turnover of cars that we've been talking about, while making sure that local shops do not miss out on passing trade. Now, my group has long maintained that there's one area where we should not be charging, and that's in our country parks. During the pandemic, we've all grown to appreciate those open areas where we can take exercise for the body and find solace for the spirit. And we should not be seeking to make money, I would maintain, out of these basic needs. Now, some people would say that you should cycle to areas like these. I would certainly encourage that as a cyclist, or use public transport. But that's an unrealistic option. And a little anecdote, on New Year's Day, my wife and I drove to Eastern Country Park. Well, technically my wife drove and I sat in the car as I don't drive. There was only a skeleton bus service running that day, so that wasn't an option. But had we tried it today, we would have needed to catch 3 different buses and a train to get there from our home, which is just not practical. And when we did arrive there, and this was in the middle of the winter, the car park was almost full. And of course, at that time, parking charges had been suspended. Now, my colleague, Councillor Carabia, who's a ward councillor for Eastham, told me that he went to have a look a couple of weeks ago, and there were just a handful of cars in the car park, while the approach road, Ferry Road, was absolutely jammed with cars parked to avoid paying the toll. In fact, this happens, I understand, in Ferry Road, in Tor Drive, in the Leverhulme car park, and B&M on the A41, because people will go to considerable lengths to avoid paying the current fee. And the proposed increase will only drive more people to seek alternative parking spots. That risk is mentioned in paragraph 2.2, but is not, I would suggest, given sufficient weight. If I'm right, the consequence is that we would move even further away from generating our £1 million revenue. And I would just finish on a positive note. I do welcome the comment in paragraph 310 about the development of electric vehicle charging points. Wirral is certainly behind the curve when it comes to this issue. With the promised phase out of petrol and diesel engines, we're going to need a network of fast charging points, and I'd like to see our authority taking the initiative in driving this forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brame. Does anybody have any other points before I say anything? Any questions? Bruce?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. hope you can hear me okay. My voice is a bit croaky. First of all, the revenue that we lost from car parking during the pandemic was the money that we're now trying to retrieve. Now, the government have said that any loss that was made through car parking and other facilities, they would reimburse 75% of that total. So is the £1 million that we're looking to retrieve, is that 75% or is that the full 100%?
I'm going to ask Cher for that information. Cher, could you clarify the answer to that, please?
I can, thank you, Chair. So you're right, Councillor Berry, the government have provided a sales fees and charges compensation scheme. So the council has to withstand 5% of any losses itself first, before then it provides any compensation. And then it provides 75% of any sales fees and charges that are lost. Now, this £1 million is actually recommending that we put car parking up. So in theory, it's not as a result of lost car parking as a result of COVID. So the sales fees and charges compensation scheme specifically only relates to lost income where facilities were closed or people weren't allowed to go out, or we had to actually stay in our homes. So that it only specifically relates to compensation for those areas. So this £1 million that was in the budget was actually not a COVID-related saving. It was a saving that related to reducing the cost of the overall highways budget, because at the time we had additional pressures that were non-COVID pressures that we actually had to provide savings for, and this savings was one of those proposals. So this saving was to offset non-COVID pressures, so it wouldn't apply to the government compensation scheme.
Thank you, Cher. Does anybody have anything else? Councillor Cooke?
Thanks. Yes, I'll come in again here if I can. Yes, when we moved over to a committee system, the 4 principles that were meant to be enhanced through that. I'll just go through those briefly and see how they've been measured up to so far in this discussion. One of them was accountability. Well, we are accountable to Wirral residents, as 1 or 2 councillors have already mentioned this evening so far. We're accountable for making sure that we balance the budget. We managed that about 3-4 months ago. And again, as has been mentioned, we did agree that we would do everything possible to generate an extra £1 million revenue through car parking. Yeah? So that's the first point. We're financially accountable, and the Conservative side should be, extremely aware of that side of things. One other thing was transparency. We're being transparent now in debating this issue, which I think is very good for residents to be able to hear this discussion now. Collaboration is a point. As far as possible, we're meant to be working with each other. And I've seen lots of examples of that so far in various committees. There does seem to be a little bit of a standoff going on now, but people adopting entrenched positions. Now, in the press report, I did mention the fact that we in the Greens were prepared to discuss the various options, which are quite complex, with other groups. Not just here in public, but to sound each other out and have meaningful discussions, assessing what sort of stances we're adopting on various issues. And we have done that with any party that's been interested to do that. As far as I could tell from the Conservative statement that appeared in the paper, there wasn't really an openness to discussion with the other groups, I detected an absolute, no attitude towards any increasing or extending of charges, even though the Conservatives were on the committee, they were in the council when the budget was voted through. The other aspect of a committee system is timeliness, making good decisions in time. And what you seem to be suggesting over there is not enough information. You haven't convinced me that the sort of information you need is essential for making these basic decisions about extending charges to places where they don't exist. That's a fairness issue across the borough. Simplifying them, raising them to a reasonable degree so that perhaps they're in line with other areas, Chester, North Wales and so, which do charge for parking in comparable areas to Wirral where we don't. The other thing that hasn't been mentioned so far is the fact that I was looking at 2017, a survey of the number of households that don't own a car in Wirral, and that's 28% of households don't own a car at all. So anything that favours motorists in any particular way, and makes it that bit easier to induce people, to go to a park because the parking's free or whatever, they are advantaged against that over a quarter, 28%, more than a quarter of residents who don't have that option of using a car. Those people are disadvantaged in that when people are using the cars, they have to put up with the noise, the pollution, everything else, and the social injustice of that, yes? And some wards where there's the worst parking and traffic going around, Birkenhead, for example, Tranmere, 40% of households don't have cars. Okay, there's the environmental issue as well, just agreeing to raise that one, but we're all aware of that because we are combating a climate emergency. We've declared a climate emergency, and yes, I'm not ashamed to say that by raising charges to a reasonable level, something like £1 an hour, up to £4 for 4 hours, that's what most areas do. It might be little notice to some people not to jump in a car and drive to New Brighton for free parking for an hour or so and then away, cluster up the roads, and then, of course, forcing more people to park in side streets and so on, of the frivolous sort of visitor that we don't want, We want people to be induced to use other means of transport, buses, trains, active travel, cycling, and, of course, if there are fewer cars, and more provision made for means other than cars for getting into places, then that will create a dynamic of its own. More cyclists. I considered today cycling here. I wasn't too keen because of the roads. I got a bus and a train. It was tough going, but I got here, If there wasn't so much emphasis on the motorists all the time, the car lobbies, then perhaps it would be easier for not just those who are committed to other forms of transport now, but other people are on that sort of cusp of making that decision. Shall I cycle? Shall I get the bus? Shall I get the train? If we can create an environment where there's more opportunities for other means of transport, then that will create a dynamic to reduce unnecessary car journeys, which is essentially what we need to do with the climate emergency. So I have no sort of hesitation in, proposing a motion at the appropriate moment for various options that have been put to us by council officers who are professionals. They've devoted an awful lot of time to going through the various options, to considering them from every angle. And yes, before you joined the committee, a couple of the members over there, we were looking at up to about 20 different options. We've narrowed it down to 4, and that was based on discussion with all the groups, at committees and at various working groups as well. Anyway, I've spoken enough for now. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooke. Yeah, I do agree with what you're saying there. And I think at this point it's worth reminding ourselves about the charges that we're actually talking about. So we're actually talking, in terms of the first hour, we're talking about, in many of our car parks, 90p would go up to £1, perhaps, if we charged £1 an hour, or £2 an hour, which is what Chris was talking about before. That's 10p an hour. So you're actually talking, you're making quite drastic statements, and you're making, potentially leaving a £1 million black hole in the budget over people paying perhaps 10p for an hour's parking. And in many places, people are paying already at the moment £1.20 for an hour's parking. So if we did do, as Councillor Cooke suggested, and standardise it as £1 an hour, those people would actually find that their parking goes down. So standardising would actually mean that in significant car parks around Wirral, car parking charges would come down. And for people who are staying a number of hours, car parking charges could come down quite considerably, especially in places like Birkenhead. So I think it's really important to remind ourselves that we are not talking about really significant amounts of money here, certainly for the first hour. And Full Council has made this decision. Full Council lies above us. We're a committee, and Full Council has asked us to choose from these options. They've not asked us to decide whether or not we charge. They have decided that we will charge. They've decided that we will increase charges and we will extend charging. And they've asked us which options. So they've asked us not if, but how we do this. And if you're not happy with the options presented, you really ought to be clear with residents who could be watching this. What is your alternative? What are you offering to fill that gap? Because car parking at the moment is potentially being subsidised by elsewhere in the budget. So car parking is perhaps being subsidised by other things. So what's your alternative to fill that gap? It's £1 million. And like I said, we're not here to decide if we increase car parking charges. Full council, full budget council, cross-party, unanimous decision, and your party supported it. There are members sitting next to you who voted for this. They voted to increase car parking charges and they voted to extend car parking charges. And we've been tasked as a committee to work together as a committee, and I go back to what Councillor Cooke says, to try and find a consensus, preferably, collaboratively, cross-party, go back to Full Council, go back to P&R and say, this is the decision of this committee. You asked us to decide how we do this. This is how we would like you to do it. So I've reminded you of the relatively small amounts of parking charges that we're talking about, but I would like to go to share, if possible, to just remind us about what those alternatives were that we looked at in budget, because obviously you weren't here when we were going through the budget procedure, and we looked closely at the alternatives. There were some really, if I remember rightly, really quite unpalatable alternatives that we dismissed. And I would be very grateful if perhaps Cher could go through some of those budget options which were rejected at committee, which were rejected at P&R, which were rejected by Full Council. And that might explain why Full Council made the decision to increase and extend parking charges. So Cher, if you could run through that, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose just to reiterate your point at the start, Full Council have made the decision to reduce the budget by £1 million. That has already been reduced in the committee's budget. So the car parking charges is budget, or the overall budget, is already £1 million less than it was. It is, as you say, a Full Council decision. So any variance away from not making changes or reducing or increasing the car parking charges, as Full Council has said, would need to go back for Full Council to actually decide whether they would want to take that decision or not. So far, you would have to actually, if you wanted to do that, you would have to go back to Full Council to actually ask for their permission to change their original decision in March. Just in terms of some of the proposals that we did put forward, so there was, in the budget consultation that went out in December, there were a range of proposals that went out for public consultation. Some of those proposals, as the Chair says, were rejected and changed when it came back to Full Council for agreement on the 1st of March. I'll just give you the main ones, really, of those. And if you wanted to actually ask permission of Full Council not to take the car parking charges, you could choose one or all of these or something completely different. The ones that were rejected were stopping school crossing patrols, closure of public conveniences, moving to 3 weekly refuse collections, closing leisure centres, changing the way that the provision is provided in museums, and changing the way that golf courses are provided. So those were the original proposals, as I say, and the Chair says, that went forward as part of the budget setting process that weren't taken. There was just one other point I wanted to make, Chair, which is really important, and members will be aware that at the moment we are subject to exceptional financial support, or a capitalisation direction, which has been mentioned already via MHCLG. MHCLG are about to start an external assurance review to make sure that we are financially sustainable going forward. And they have given us an offer of capitalisation for this year, for 21-22. They haven't said that that will be a guarantee. They've said that that is a conditional offer based on the outcome of their review. And one of the elements in their review that they emailed me was that there will be a specific review on good leadership and governance. And one of the elements of that review will be on financial stability and the council's ability to stick to the budget plans that they have implemented. So, I mean, that is one of the areas that MHC will be looking at when they come to actually do their external assurance review. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chair. So, as a committee, we just heard what the alternatives were. So, for those of you who weren't, and there are new councillors here who perhaps weren't that familiar with the rather traumatic experience of going through those budget choices that we went through earlier in the year. So we did look at leisure centre closures, as Chair said, and golf changes to the golf offer, to art gallery closures perhaps, and getting rid of lollipop men and lollipop women, jeopardising children's road safety. We rejected these. We rejected closing public conveniences. We rejected anything that might have the possibility of compulsory redundancies as well. We value our staff and we don't want to put them through that trauma. So as a committee, we also are aware that we've got MHCLG watching us. We can't just object to charges and leave £1 million black hole in the council budget. We all voted for an increase unanimously cross-party. We voted for an increase and additional charges at Budget Council in order to avoid those alternatives. They seemed much worse at the time. And this had cross-party support. So every councillor that was present at that meeting unanimously supported that budget. Just a minute. So we're not here, we're not here as a committee to choose whether or not to put charges up. That's already been decided by full council. We have been asked by full council to choose how to do that. So before I ask the Conservatives what their alternative is proposed to be, I mean, maybe they'll fail to put an alternative and they are actually suggesting that we leave £1 million black hole in the highways budget, which would have to come from these alternatives. We would have to go back to full council and consider these alternatives. I think residents do deserve to know what the Conservatives are offering here. Let's be clear, is it one of the parking charges? Is it any of the parking charges in this report? That, you know, or is it one of the really quite awful alternatives that's already been outlined? Or perhaps you have something new that you'd like to share with us, and then perhaps we could all support that if you do have something new that you'd like to share with us. Unless you're not offering anything, in which case what you are offering is economic irresponsibility in the extreme. And as chair of this committee, I'm not happy to offer that back to full council. The government's watching, MHCLG is watching. Are the local Conservatives actually suggesting that we renege on our promised legal budget? I think what we ought to do now is to perhaps adjourn for 15 minutes and we can talk in our groups and try to go back to what has already been mentioned, which is the spirit of the committee system, whereby we work together and we try to come up with a positive solution to any challenge. And we don't try and play any games and we don't try and get too political. We remember that this is the committee system, not the cabinet system. If we refer it back up to P&R, which could be the easy option for some people, that is just like going back to the cabinet system. We might as well have the cabinet system. We asked for the committee system. We are supposed to work together. And this was by full council considered to be the least worst option. So I'm going to ask for a 15-minute adjournment while we remind ourselves. Go on.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. In the report that's been talked about the new motorhome daily parking tariff. What have the officers done to see what sort of money is going to be coming in from that? Has that been looked at as part of this? Has it been looked at so we can use that as potentially for something? I'm just asking what information has been gathered for that. It's in the report.
No, I'm really sorry. I didn't hear the first part of what you were saying.
Sorry, there's a 2.6 members are recommended to consider the introduction of a new motorhome daily parking tariff. Now, has that been looked at? Has any studies been done there? What money will be coming in if we do that? What will that impact in the charges? So, we need that information as well.
So we perhaps can ask for that after the 15-minute adjournment. We can get
Right.
that kind of information. So thank you for that, Councillor Collins. Is that okay if we take 15 minutes? Can I take that as agreed then, that we'll have 15 minutes to talk amongst ourselves? Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you, committee.
suggestion that has been made that there would be a reduction or saving for people in parts of Birkenhead were we to go for the standard £1, £2, £3 per hour figure. It's been pointed out that would mean a reduction for people in certain parts. Can we quantify that? How much income would we be foregoing if we go for that standardised rate, which I think has a lot to commend it, but I'd just like to know how much money we would stand to lose if we implemented that.
Can I ask Steve to answer that question, please, Councillor Brame?
Hi, thank you, Chair. I haven't got that information to hand. What I have done is evaluated through the standardised charges across the whole board to see what additional income that potentially would raise, but I don't have that individual impact of where we've got £1.20 for 1 hour in Birkenhead, what the effect of that £1 would be to hand. I can go away and provide that information at a later date, but I haven't got that to hand right now.
Thank you, Steve. Are there any other comments or questions? Steve?
Well, I do hope that the discussions, offline discussions, in a sort of spirit of working together has yielded some agreements. If it hasn't, then whoever can't make the tough decision will have to explain that to the public, that they aren't prepared to fill the budget gap, with the dire consequences that may result of not doing it. And don't forget, you know, the longer you delay an implementation, particularly where income is involved, the less time you have to collect that income, and eventually, by dithering and dallying, you may actually cost the public of Wirral more by a delayed decision, because you don't get the full 12 months income or whatever by delaying. So I think people should bear that in mind. But it's not the first time, Chair, to be honest, that we've been let down by, if the Conservatives aren't prepared to make a decision. It's not the first time we've been let down. We had a working party on car parking, and we had agreement to reintroduce, post-COVID, reintroduce the car parking charges. And the working party was made up of all parties, all agreed that they should reintroduce to avoid this income gap. And then, all of a sudden, the Tories changed tune and went against their own advice of their own working party, and then voted against the implementation or reintroduction of car parking charges. Don't know whatever reason, but that would have made the situation even worse had we listened to them. So I think there's a demonstration perhaps going on tonight of incompetence or deliberate sabotage, potentially. And I don't think they'd be they wouldn't be too upset if the inspectors come in and started taking over things. They'd use that to their advantage, because they really don't care about Wirral's reputation in many respects. So if this is just hard-nosed politics appealing to people and defraying from a proper decision, I mean, why have we got so many different levels of car parking charges across the borough? It probably goes back to when we were actually separate boroughs, all that way back, and no one sort of had the nous or the courage to sort of tackle, why should you pay less in Birkenhead, or why should you pay more in X, Y, and Z? It doesn't make a lot of sense. What attracts people to areas is what is there for them to go for. And obviously with the regeneration Birkenhead, that's a future project. But look outside here, the regeneration job we've done in New Brighton. People will come because there's something here for them to come for. People go to Southport, as a local example, because there's something they feel is there for them. It's not about the level of car parking charges. It's about what was on the other end of the offer. It's quite funny. Well, not funny, because nothing funny about putting charges up when people don't like paying extra charges. But we've seen, a demonstration tonight of irresponsibility. I couldn't believe my eyes. We're coming in to discuss car parking charges, and there's a Volkswagen parked on the pavement outside the town hall. I mean, what examples that give? Oh, park on the pavement's all right, because you're from Hoylake, you can park on the pavement. So I'm just saying, we've got to be sensible to the public out there. No one will like charges, and if you just want to say, well, we didn't vote for it and put it in your leaflets. I've seen leaflets from various groups that are so remote from the truth, it doesn't really matter what you do in a committee meeting. If they're prepared to lower themselves to that sort of standard and not not honour the budget commitment that their own leader and group made, then I think it's woe betide them. And they will be found out. They always do. People who aren't prepared to do the right thing always get found out. So my view is that I'm hoping there is going to be something moved tonight, because the sooner we plug this budget gap, the better it will be for all the people of Wirral, not just the motorists, not just businesses, because the budget of the council has to balance and has to be kept within limits, and we have to look after those treasured services that may well benefit from £1 million income. So that's all I want to say, Chair.
Thanks, Steve. Les?
Thank you, Chair. Am I surprised here tonight to be listening to Councillor Foulkes using the Conservative Party as a whipping boy, the same man that would get up an hour early just to hate the Conservatives an hour longer? All these comments. And can I remind
Chair, I'm being named and insulted, and actually it was the Lib Dems I got up an hour longer.
You've insulted us, so you can take it as
if you want to personalise the argument by naming me, then be prepared to get the statements right.
I'll get the right statements right. You were in charge of the council, as you quite rightly said, when a lot of these parking charges were put in place. So now you're arguing about charges being different in different areas. You're the ones that put them in place. Apart from that, Chair, we are being asked to make a decision when we've already heard an officer of this council admit that he has not got the figures of how much we would lose by making this decision. I think that is an admission that is terrible from an officer who should have done all that work to find out, by making this decision, how much are we going to lose? How much are we going to gain? And this goes to the argument of us not having the proper information at this committee to make this decision properly.
Thanks, Councillor Rowlands. Just to confirm, and in defence of the officer in question, officers were asked to come back with a series of options for us. So full council, cross-party, unanimously voted to increase and extend car parking charges, and tasked officers to come back to us tonight with a selection of options, and we would choose from those options. So we've been tasked to choose from those options, and it's the officers' job to look at the detail, and we've been told that they have done that, and we also know that we've looked at parking charges numerous times before over the last few years. So that information is there. The officer simply didn't bring it with him tonight, that's all, but the information is there. We don't need it particularly because we're not choosing whether or not to implement parking charges. We're deciding how to implement parking charges, or at least that's what full council has asked us to do. So we don't need that detail. I was going to go to Phil.
With the great respect,
sorry.
Chair.
So can I just go to Phil McCourt? Thank you.
Sorry, members. I just wanted to say a couple of words really to sympathise with the position that you've been put in as a committee. And indeed for the officers who've had to bring this report here. There is an instruction from council to move monies around in the parking funds so that £1 million can go elsewhere. And indeed this committee has been instructed to bring about £1 million worth of income during this financial year through additional and increased parking charges. Now, the difficult place that you're all put in is that clearly to make a sound decision, you need all of the information that you feel you need to do to make a finessed and intelligent decision in how you bring that about. But equally, there is that pressure upon you that this is a saving to be made within this financial year. and therefore every moment's delay can bring about a point where the wait for additional, such as the strategy to come in September or other additional information, can put you in a position where actually not taking a decision is acting contrary to the budget, which means this is something that would have to go back, the almost daft situation where you have to go back to full council to get consent not to make a decision. So it really does leave you in a difficult position this evening. And there are some options open to you, and I think those options are asking, if you have them, quite precise questions so that officers can either answer them tonight or come back to you as soon as possible. And that might mean calling an extraordinary meeting of this council committee to have them come back to you, or in making use of your ability to pass this on to P&R just to make use of their timetable. There are options open to you, but I'm afraid they're far and few between. So I just wanted to sympathise with you, because I realise this is getting quite difficult now, and political with a small p as well as a big P. Big P politics is over to you and not for us. But I just wanted to sympathise and try and perhaps focus where we go to next in asking those questions, unless a member feels they're in a position to make a proposal now. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Phil. Can I just remind us what the alternatives were, just so that residents watching can be mindful of what's at stake here? So we've got, in the budget, we rejected, when we accepted parking charge increases and extension, we rejected leisure centre closures, we rejected golf closure, we rejected art gallery closure, we rejected axing lollipop men and lollipop women and jeopardising children's road safety, and we rejected closing public conveniences, and we rejected anything that had the chance of compulsory redundancies. And we managed to keep all of those safe, and part of the way we did that was deciding that parking would pay for itself rather than being subsidised. So we would therefore need to extend parking charges to areas that don't currently charge, and we would need to increase charges and perhaps standardise them, as has been mentioned today. So what's at stake is all of those other services if we don't get this right. And in addition to that, we also, I need to remind you, have MHCLG watching our every move with that loan at stake as well, which would really mean dire consequences and could mean administrators coming in, and then everything closes, all non-statutory services close then, and that really would be a very big change for residents. So to protect residents, full council decided that the least worst option was for people to pay maybe an extra 10 pence for an hour's parking, and in some cases there would actually be a reduction. We asked, just to get back to you and to confirm again, we asked officers to go away and make the decision regarding which options we should choose tonight, and officers came back to us with all the information that we really need to make that decision tonight. Does anybody have anything else to say? Councillor Cooke.
I'd like to propose a motion, please, if that's okay, Chair. I move that this committee agrees to adopt car parking charging options 1, 3 and 4, and to standardise charges at £1 for up to 1 hour, £2 for up to 2 hours, £3 for up to 3 hours, £4 for up to 4 hours, and £5 for over 4 hours or all-day parking. And that this committee delegates authority to the Director of Neighbourhood Services to implement the decision of this committee, and the parking charges options selected as soon as is reasonably practicable.
Thank you. I'm prepared to second that, and I'd just like to add that I just do not feel, as chair of this committee, that it's acceptable that we leave £1 million black hole in the budget. I don't feel it's acceptable that we abdicate responsibility when we know what the options are and we know that the officers have thought very carefully about this.
Chair, I don't feel we can make a decision based on the information we have available.
Okay,
so it's not about abrogating responsibility.
Sorry, the chair is actually speaking. I'm not prepared that this committee abdicate responsibility, and therefore I do second Councillor Cooke's proposal there. We can vote on that, and you can express your opinion by voting on it. Yes, please.
Members, could those in favour of the motion that has been moved and seconded please indicate those for? Chair, hand up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6. Yes, you. 6. Yes, it's that 6 for. And those against? 4. Any abstentions? 1 abstention. So that's carried.
Thank you, Vicky. Thanks. So this actually brings us to item 7, which is the carbon budgets, and I think Mike Coburn is going to be introducing that. This can be found on page 37 to 52 of the agenda pack. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Chair. Good evening, committee. For those of you who don't know me, although some of you know me well, I'm Mike Coburn and I'm the Head of Environment and Climate Emergency for the Council. So there were 2 related reports, items 7 and 8. The first one is to set a baseline for the carbon budget for the Council, and the second one is an update on that baseline, in other words, our performance in the year 2021. So the first report goes back to the declaration that the Council yourselves declared at full Council in July 2019 to declare an environment and climate emergency. But the declaration, if you recall, was quite prescriptive. Quite a lot of things that we wanted to do and stop doing and commit ourselves to. One of the key things that you wanted officers to do was to reintroduce the Council's carbon budget reporting. And here we are now. So we, since that declaration, a number of things have been achieved or put in place, and you've been kept up to speed on those. One of the key things actually was our last committee meeting, the meeting in March, where you approved the Council's Environment and Climate Emergency Policy. And the headline for that policy was that you've committed the Council to being net carbon neutral in 10 years by 2030. So to do that, we obviously need to understand where we are and what we need to do as a council. And this is the council's interest that we're talking about. We need to set a metric. Now, we've previously reported the carbon budget to you as a council in the past. It was stopped, and as I say, because of your resolution, but also the policy, we've reintroduced it. So the report is in detail. You've obviously had time to read it. Just to clarify, the budget, the carbon budget, is basically the council's emissions as a council, as an entity, set and baselined in the year 2019-20. So that's the year before the pandemic and the change of how we've operated fundamentally. And it basically sets out, as you can see in the report, a movement down to net carbon neutrality in 10 years. As we've reported in the report that accompanied the policy in March, this is an ambitious target. It's something that's going to require quite a lot of focus, so ambition. But as we said to you in March, we had third-party experts that came in, confirmed that what we were doing was ambitious, but ultimately achievable. So the trajectories for the carbon budget sets out that journey to carbon neutrality in 10 years. Thanks, Chair. I beg your pardon, I should have introduced my colleague Andrew Snow, who's the Conservation Officer for the Council and works in assets, and we're both here to answer any questions.
Mike, hi, good evening. As I've mentioned before, we are reducing our carbon percentage. Our reduction in carbon is reducing year on year, but of course we're squeezing that orange that's got less juice in it harder and harder every year to get slightly reduced percentage savings. How confident are we, looking at the fact that we're on track for up to 2022, but off track post that we can make these savings in time?
The year 2021 is obviously a very different year, a year that was not foreseen. No one could have predicted what happened up to February 2020, but nonetheless, it fundamentally changed the way we operated. As a result, the first year we've hit our target, that's the next report, but basically we've exceeded the target, but based mainly on the fact that we've operated in a very different way. The challenge to the Council is to make sure that our recovery strategy, which is obviously being produced now, follows that same line, and that some of the things that were unforeseen benefits for this agenda, we don't backtrack on, and we're confident that we can do that. But it's going to require fundamental changes on building use, building efficiency, the type of energy that we procure, the fleet, how we operate the fleet, the type of fleet that we do, the journeys that we make, etc. All those issues, including regeneration and planning, including the local plan, fundamentally have a part to play in that trajectory. But we have a plan. We have the policy that you approved in March. The external experts said to us it is achievable following that line, but it is going to require a collective effort from everyone, from members, from officers, from all departments, regardless of their serving in the council, will play their part. So the answer to your question is, it is achievable, but there are key decisions to make as a council moving forward.
Thank you. You mentioned that sort of the infrastructure and the hardware, so to speak. How important is behaviour, human behaviour in all this?
Absolutely essential. We won't make any progress unless we all buy into this. So we're making good progress with a carbon literacy programme for all members and officers. So there are some more courses this month and next, and by the time they've been completed, 100 people have been through that. New members, we need to get to you and get you invited onto the course. That just helps us make informed decisions and understand the consequences of our decisions moving forward. But yeah, if the question is more about our officers and as a council, as an entity, but also the public, yeah, the hefty element of our policy is changing behaviour and convincing people that they can make a contribution, that there's no small contribution is not going to make a difference. Everyone has to make that difference, and our policy that was collectively developed by this committee reflects that.
Thanks, Chair. You talk. We have a fleet of vehicles. What are we looking to the future to reduce the impact on our carbon footprint from that? Are we looking at different use of vehicles and how they're used and where they're used, etc., etc.? Has that been part of the plan?
Very much so, and obviously overhauling fleet is going to take time, and we need to make some informed decisions. The first thing is to eliminate unnecessary journeys. And that happened because of lockdown, and we want to maintain that. The use of Teams has been a success. We shouldn't be backtracking on that. I am guilty of the sort of conveyor belt between Hamilton Building and the town hall in the past. Those should be done on Teams. That's the first point. The second point is we can invest in active transport for our staff, and we are. We've got alternatives we're looking at. Powered bikes, etc., is something we actually have now. Something called an e-cargo bike. But then, in terms of fleet, there are basically three types of fleet. There are the fleet that we actually manage ourselves, by our fleet management, ambulances, vehicles, etc., vans, and we need to change the type of fuel that they're powered by, and that will be done incrementally. There are then organisations like BIFA, who carry out services on our behalf, and we have to overhaul the big RCVs and how they're powered. And then thirdly, and perhaps the most challenging, is the smaller element, the private taxi drivers and those sort of people who carry out service on our behalf. We have to work with them on giving them notice and supporting them in changing their type of fleet as well. So it is a key element of our plan. It'll be done incrementally in that way. Of course, Chair. So, can we just ask Andrew to expand on my point?
Thanks, Andrew.
Yes, I'd just like to point out that in 3.12.4, the experts that we worked with, local partnerships, looked at what we were proposing at a series of workshops through the Climate Emergency Action Plan. And you'll see that action on fleet transport and business mileage claims is factored into their assessment that our ambitions to become carbon net zero by 2030 are possible.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay. Does anybody else? Sorry, Councillor Rowlands.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's already been mentioned tonight. First of all, I thank you for your report. It's an excellent report. It's been mentioned tonight about as Wirral Borough Council, we're behind on electric charging points. Is that factoring into your plan as well? Because that will have a great bearing on our carbon emissions.
Absolutely, fundamentally, and there are leading authorities out there that have really stolen a march on this sort of issue, and we need to catch up with them there. That's one of the issues that we need to focus on. This report is obviously about the council and the way it functions. So we need to be putting infrastructure in our new buildings, our new complexes for our fleet. So this is about our fleet. But in terms of the Wirral's target of 2041 being net carbon neutral, and that's the overall target for Wirral the place. It's absolutely essential that infrastructure is built into all our regeneration projects moving forward, or that's at least a consideration. The regeneration of Birkenhead Town Centre, etc. We have to build that infrastructure into what we design, what we put in place, and we are working with our regen colleagues and our planning colleagues to do that.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Andrew. Has anybody got anything else to ask about that? Councillor Cooke.
Yeah, thanks for a very informative report. On page 43, it's 3.10.2. There's a table point. You've got under scope 1, 3.10.2, fugitive emissions, and it's 0%. I just wonder if you could explain what those are for my benefit and other people viewing. Well, I haven't got any. I haven't got any of those.
Okay, I've managed to get tangled up in my glasses. Fugitive emissions are the emissions that are associated with fugitive emissions are associated with air conditioning systems and large refrigeration systems. We've when we're reporting them for greenhouse gas emissions reports, we haven't had the resource to do that. Now, it's a Scope 1 emission. I think it's a very important one to capture, but we will need the resource made available, and I think may have mentioned that in the report, that this is one of the priority areas when we expand what we're doing, because this is just a starting off point. It's not necessarily the end point.
Thank you for that explanation. It's just at a glance.
Thanks, Councillor Cooke. Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. Anything else that anybody, Mike?
Thanks, Chair. Very naive, this question. Have we considered solar panels on the new projects, on the new regeneration projects and everything else? Is that part of that? Because I have read the report, but I haven't seen anything about solar panels.
No, this is about measuring our emissions. Solar panels are definitely something that can reduce our use of electricity, which when we look at green electricity purchase or the acquisition of green electricity, it would have a financial impact. I haven't been involved in the assessment of the new buildings, but I am assured that their full cognizance has been taken about sustainability as a whole, and I have been asking the question. Of course, with solar panels, we can't. It would be lovely to be able to put solar panels on every building we could find, but we are constrained by the distribution network. The district network operator, who in our case is Scottish Power, cannot allow uncontrolled generation into the distribution network, because it can cause, basically, if they can't isolate all the sources of generation going into the system, it puts their staff at risk. And also, what's less known is that too much electricity being fed into an antiquated system, and we do have some antiquated systems, can cause failure of those systems through electrical and thermal stress.
I understand that, but what I'm concerned about is we've got new projects going on and everything else. So we're not looking at the old systems, we're looking at brand new systems coming in. I'm looking at a couple of things. Is one, reducing the carbon footprint, but also if we're producing our own electricity, we're saving money, which then helps towards budgets. I know there is a capital outlay, but what I'm thinking of as the future goes, we have the opportunity with new buildings to actually look at making them very sustainable and one, carbon neutral, but two, actually producing power for ourselves.
Two things on that. I think they mentioned in the report. First of all, we have, Chair will confirm this, we have a significant capital budget aligned for building efficiency this year, and we need to get on and design that programme. So that's existing buildings and their efficiency. The second thing is that the commercial district, or whatever it's called, the new hub that will be in Birkenhead, will need to be an exemplar. It's as simple as that. So in terms of its energy use, its efficiency, etc., it will need to be an exemplar to people on Wirral.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Andrew. I think the team have done fantastic work on this. I think we probably all agree on that. It's two really, really good reports, really fantastic analysis of what we need to do and what we've been doing so far. So I just wanted to say thank you and well done for a really good piece of work. The recommendations, we'll go through recommendations for the first report. So as printed in the report, to approve the proposed carbon budgets from 2021 to 27-28, and to approve the annual carbon budget performance reports that they should be tabled in June each year. Can we agree that by assent? Sorry, we need a mover and a second. I propose that. Do I have a seconder? Thanks. Thank you. Can we agree that then? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And the second report, the carbon budget performance report 2021. Which is pages 53 to 68 on the agenda pack. Before I go any further, just checking that there aren't any questions on that. Now, okay, you do. No, sorry, the carbon budget. There were two reports, and I took the recommendations separately. Okay. So just before I go to the I just wanted to check that nobody had any last questions. So the recommendation for that one is that the Environment, Climate, Emergency and Transport Committee has recommended to note the content of that report. I'll move that. Seconder? Thank you. We agree by assent? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. So that does bring us to the biodiversity report. So it's a progress report. It's item 9 in the agenda, and it's found on page 69 to 76. It's the progress update on biodiversity actions. And I'd like again to invite Mike Coburn to present this report as well, please. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. I think the Director is going to introduce the report. I'm here. I'm happy to answer questions. And we've also got Neil Garnett from Parks and Countryside here as well.
Thanks, Nikki.
Thank you. So committee approved in March this year the Council's Environment and Climate Emergency Policy. Since then, our officers have been putting initiatives in place and taking action to progress the policy's objectives and commitments. So this report focuses on 2 of the Council's biodiversity commitments within that policy, and that is firstly looking at the tree, woodland and hedgerow strategy, which launched in July 20, and the second is the transforming of our open spaces and enhancing biodiversity, which includes an update on the current position with the development of the Council's pollinator plan for roadside verges and parks and green spaces, and the approach to grounds maintenance with a blend of reduced grass cutting and cessation of maintenance regimes being implemented during 21-22. So within the recommendations section of the report, the committee is recommended to note and comment on the content of the report, on the progress being made against the Council's biodiversity commitments, and also note the developments of the Council's pollinator plan, and request that the Director presents the plan to committee for approval this autumn. And we have Mike Coburn and Neil Garnett here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikki. Do I have any questions or comments? Bruce.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I apologise for my voice. Struggle on through. Thanks, Mike, for the presentation. I have a number of issues really concerning this. I'm quite happy with the pollinators, and I was a bit sceptical at first, but now it's developed. I think it does really, it looks nice when you're on highways and you're driving past. The issue I do have is to do with residential areas where the rewilding is taking place. I've had lots and lots of complaints off residents over the last couple of weeks, and particularly in areas near riverbanks, such as the Arrow Brook and the River Birket. These areas which have been allowed to rewild, the grass is so long, they're not even cutting the edges of it anymore. People are struggling to exercise, walk their dogs. I've been told that it's enticing rats. Dog walkers are complaining that dogs are picking up ticks from the long grass. We've also had concerns about when the grass will be cut, in so much as I believe the council doesn't have the equipment at the moment to cope with long grass, and also they don't have the facilities to pick up the long grass and remove it off site, which is that is actually in the report to say that that will be a requirement to remove the long grass once it is cut. So I have put together a proposal, which I'll ask the chair if I can read that. Am I okay to do that?
Can I just clarify if anybody else wants to?
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, yeah.
Moving any recommendations or proposals?
Basically, what I'm asking for is for officers to look at the situation again. As I say, I'm happy with the pollinating and the open areas and places like that. But where the rewilding is taking place in residential areas, it's totally unsuitable. and I would ask that it is looked at again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. Before I won't take that as a proposal just yet, because I want there to be some debate and discussion, and I think you might find that there's quite a lot of agreement with you, that there's quite a bit of support. Michael, go on.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of questions for you, which I know you won't have the information. Well, I'll be surprised if you got it, but the amount of trees that have been planted, we planted a lot of trees. I know you've planted a lot of trees. What has been the survival rate so far? Because we are aware there's been some severe vandalism done to a number of the trees in different areas. So I'm just wondering what the survival rate is. So I'd like that information, and by area if possible. And also I'd like to know the different schemes of grass cutting by ward if possible, so we know when our wards are getting cut and how often they're getting cut. Because I know we've had a no-mow May, but that was actually not for residential areas, from what I can gather. That was for the parks and countryside areas, wasn't it? It wasn't for verges, but I haven't seen a mower in the area in May anyway, so that's the concern. So if we can have that information as well, please. Thank you.
Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, it was quite innovative, wasn't it, the council to go for this, because as we've seen earlier with questions, one person's biodiversity is another person describing it as a swamp, or biodiversity where, flowers, pollinators are growing. Some people describe them as weeds. So it's a very subjective matter. Now, my view is that it's gone far better than I think many of us predicted, to be honest. And I think with a bit of fine tuning, I think we may have made a breakthrough here. And the fine tuning is in and around points like Bruce is making, where if you've got a pollinated area, you also need a cut area on the edge, maybe. So you can walk your dog, you can walk. You don't have to go in the longer grass and stuff like that. And the selection of areas, I would be amazed if we got it 100% right first time round. I've had one, not making this up, I've had one genuine complaint about an area in my patch. And I also think that the thing that sells the message is the sort of plaques, the discs about what's going on, so people know what's going on. Now, again, they were okay at the beginning, but a lot of them went missing, probably in people's back gardens, who knows? But so that messaging is key to it being a success and continuing to be a success. So, if these signs could be a bit more robust or survive a little bit longer, I think the message would get across. But I also think that the key to this is those who know their patch. The councillors know the patch very well, so they are key to it. And we did have a plan. I sent a resident the full plan because it was in the council minutes, and his area was part of that plan. I don't think I've actually, you're never going to please all the people all the time, but once it's explained that what the message is behind it, what you're trying to achieve, and pollinators and all that goes, and we just had the carbon budget, so you don't need to mow as much, so you don't need the energy that's going into the mowing. There was a saving generated from it, which we all are very welcome for, because we've all had to make some of us have had to make difficult decisions on budgetary issues. So I think generally, there's an acceptance now, and I would ask the officers to learn all the lessons, hear what local councillors are saying, and then go to that next phase of it being even more successful. So I think by and large, we pulled it off, Chair. But there will always be, those areas where we did get wrong, and I think we should be big enough to say, well, yeah, that probably does need mowing more often than, say, another area. But as long as we can keep it in the budget, that's going to be vital as well. So just they're my comments, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. I agree. I agree with what's been said previously as well. I have an additional recommendation that I would like people to consider, as well as the recommendation.
Excuse me, Sorry, I just wanted to come in if that's okay.
Yes, sorry, I didn't realise you were waiting. Sorry, Alan. Sorry.
I would agree very much with what Councillor Foulkes has just been saying. I think we all had reservations about this policy of no mow May and so forth. And what I would say, I'm very grateful to the officers who have been very responsive, and they've listened to representations from ward councillors who, as Steve says, know their patch. And they've been trying to accommodate some suggestions we've had where we could swap some bits around that are being cut for others that could be left. I do wonder, though, about the organisation council-wide, whereas we've found some patches in our ward which are cut by the Highways Department, while others are cut by the Parks and Gardens, and it seems... I'm sure there must be some rationalisation that could be made if we could have one organisation that did grass cutting, and I'm sure that could actually lead to some efficiencies if we were to look at that. Also, so look at we became very keen to increase pollinators, but I think very often we lack data, and I don't want to create extra jobs and work for officers who are very stretched. But I wonder if we can quantify by doing some sampling whether we are actually getting increases in pollinators in these areas that are being left uncut. I don't think it's a priority to find that, but if it could be easily ascertained, I think that would be helpful information to know if we are actually achieving what we're setting out to do. And I would very much agree with what Councillor Collins was saying about the tree planting. Having looked around a place like Oxton Fields, a couple of hundred trees were planted there last year. Some of them are flourishing and doing very well, but I was walking around there yesterday and I saw, sadly, a lot have failed. I don't think through vandalism. Maybe they just planted the wrong species in the wrong place, but there's quite a high failure rate, and I think we probably need to quantify that. But if we're going to reach our target of planting trees by the end of the decade.
Thanks, Alan. Sorry, can I just say what I've been waiting patiently to say? Thank you. I am very aware, having really pushed this agenda as Cabinet member, that we have asked the teams involved, the officers and the operatives on the ground, to engage in what is effectively a sea change in what they do and their attitude towards what they do. And we're talking about some people who have been judged all their working lives by the standard of the grass maintenance that they engage with and the neatness of the verges and open spaces that they are responsible for. And I think they've done it remarkably well in such a short space of time, to ask people to do virtually the opposite of what we've been asking them to do all their careers, and been judged on what they've been doing all their careers. For us to suddenly start judging them on doing it differently, very differently, the opposite, I think they've done really, really well. And I think it has been a learning journey, and I think a lot of mistakes could have been made, which, to my surprise, weren't actually made. I think they've done surprisingly well, considering what we were asking them to do. So I'd just like to put on record my appreciation and my thanks for what I consider to be really outstanding work in this area in particular. I'm very impressed. And I think that bodes well for the future, particularly listening to what members of the committee are saying, particularly if we engage with member feedback. So if we can, as elected members, if we can represent our communities that we know very well and the open spaces, if we can exchange our ideas and feedback on that, then I think it can only get better and better. So that was my third recommendation, was to add on that we engage with some community feedback through the elected members, which I think is what we discussed right at the start when we were first talking about this, tree planting and rewilding. We did think that it would work best of all with resident feedback. So my third, in the recommendations, I wanted to add a third recommendation, which was that we have more pronounced feedback, really, and regular engagement and consultation with the communities through elected members. So, you know, we'll have to go away and think about how that happens, whether it's workshops or whether it's updates. But I just think it's important that we perhaps preempt some of the damage that was done to trees when they were in the, you know, planted where residents didn't want them, and you know, where we're getting complaints perhaps about rewilding, versus the majority, I think, are very happy with the rewilding, and I do think it looks, in places, it just looks absolutely stunning. It looks beautiful, and I do agree as well, because I did query some roundabouts, and I was told that's a different team. So if we could have a look at making that a bit more joined up, that would be great.
Chair, it's one team.
It's one team. That definitely needs clarifying then. Okay, thank you.
Just a couple of questions. I don't want the answers now. If you could let me have them in at some point in the future. I'd like to know the number of pollinators that we've introduced since this policy started, please, either in number of pollinators or cash or whatever it is, a measure. The same about biodiversity, the number of different species we've introduced or have introduced themselves, however it works, both in number or cash. And then I need the baseline study from which we started all this, please. Presumably there was a baseline study of how many species and pollinators we have on the Wirral.
Simon,
And therefore,
can I just clarify, are you asking the team that are already very, very stretched to count butterflies? Because because that's what it sounds like.
You might find that very amusing, but how am I measuring you?
Because if we're dealing with, I'm concerned about what you're saying. I'm really concerned because we're dealing with massive biodiversity loss. We're one of the most biodiverse, depleted countries on the planet. And you're asking us to judge the success on whether there's a gain. If we reduce the loss, if we slow down the loss of biodiversity... Well, then tell me what the
reduction in loss is.
I'm just talking. If we reduce the extent to which biodiversity is being lost in this country, that is a starting point. So I don't think the team have got time or resources to go out and do that. I'd be very concerned to ask them, especially given the budget discussion that we've just had. And I'd be more minded to ask, I do agree with you that we do, I mean, I have already flagged this up, that it would be nice to be able to have data and comparisons to be made in the future about success rates. But I would have been more inclined, I don't know if anybody else agrees, to reach out to many of the voluntary organisations and charities out there that do this and who do it very well, who might be able to offer their information. The people who do bird counts, the people who do insect counts, they might be able to help us with the data they've already got, and they might be able to work with us. But I'd be very worried about suggesting that our officers go out there and check the degree of information that you're asking for.
Chair, it was a very long answer about what I'm trying to get. How do I measure the success of this project? The only way to measure the success of a project is have a starting point, and as you say, whether we go up or down is a little bit irrelevant in the scheme of things, but I want to know if we're going up or down, because the residents who pay their taxes to support this project want to know if it's a success or not. If it's not a success, then we can stop and save some money and spend it elsewhere.
Sorry. Bring you in.
Yes. Councillor, we're working on a series of development dashboards for this committee, which will have data, and that will continue over time, so it will show trend analysis. So maybe that could be part of that work and that working group, that we could start to look at that in terms of percentage rates and looking at what we actually can collect now, but what we'll continue to collect as these pilots progress.
That's fine. Do we have a baseline study from where we started?
Mike, do you want to?
Chair, if it helps, and I did refer to it in the report, we are working, I think the tense is beginning, but we are engaging fully with our planning colleagues, and you can expect some fairly major biodiversity studies to come from that piece of work related to the local plan, which, as we said in the report, will have to involve yourselves fundamentally. So that baselining, where we're going from, etc. The biodiversity net gain, which is going to be a key aspect of the local plan, are all activities that we're moving forward on.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you. Does anybody have Mike?
Just for clarification, can you confirm there is one team that does the grass cutting within the parks and the verges? Or, because there used to be two teams, wasn't there? There was the leisure services, if you like, and then you had the highways that did the verges. Are they now one team?
Yes, I can confirm that the one team. There's still a highways maintenance department in the parks department. Okay, so we all work as one team with cemeteries, allotments. We're still all one team. Thank you.
I think perhaps what happened was that previously the highway maintenance contract was external, and that was brought in. So previously Continental were the contractor, but they've been working in the council for
since 2014.
Prior to the Continental, we had one team that did everything. So you didn't have a highways team; you just had one team to do the verges, to do the the parks and gardens. So why have a highways department within leisure when you've got when you can reduce that to have one team doing the whole lot? So you've got a group in Victoria Park doing their area there and doing the verges around that area.
Yes, I can remember it well because that's where I came from. I came from the tools. We used to cut the highways, but in 2004 it went out to Continental, and when it came back, we just thought it'd be more efficient, more better to run it like it does now. You know, we don't cross over. We have different departments, different ownership for, say, Victoria Park, and they have ownership for the highway verges.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Neil.
Can I just for a matter of fact, remind the committee that the Conservative group did try to privatise parks and gardens when Jeff Green had brief reign of the council, and when I came back as leader, we reversed that decision. And I think the reactiveness of having your own in-house service to this type of very sensitive stuff, I think hands-on control is much easier to deal with when it's in-house rather than it being privatised.
Thanks, Steve. That's really interesting. And the team have, like I said before, the team have been fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And I think we can all agree there are areas of the borough now that are absolutely stunning. So we're ticking the boxes for it looking beautiful and biodiversity as well. So thank you for that. I mentioned that I wanted to add a recommendation, so I'd just like to run it past people just to see what the rest of the committee think about this. So the recommendations are to note and comment on the contents of the report and the progress being made against the Council's biodiversity commitments, to note the development of the Council's pollinator plan and request that the Director presents the plan to committee for approval this autumn. And I wanted to add, with committee's permission, 3, learning from the work in this report, and that's each section of this report. Committee requests regular engagement and consultation with communities through their elected members. Bruce. Is that okay?
Just so that Councillor Berry can say what it is, and then we can see whether you can agree with
Okay, just checking. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse my voice. This Environment, Climate Change and Transport Committee request officers revisit the rewilding policy with a view to reintroducing regular maintenance programmes in residential areas and in particular areas close to riverbanks such as the Arrowbrook and the River Birket, both of which have seen an increase of rodent activity and dogs plagued by ticks from long grass since the cessation of grass cutting. We would also seek assurance that long grass, once cut, is collected and removed off-site. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Bruce. We've got a note of that.
Chair, can I ask one of the officers if the resolution is taken on board, would there be a budgetary implication? Because I would not be prepared to vote blindly for something that has not been costed or has a budgetary implication, particularly in the position that we're in. So if there's would there be a budgetary implication to complete revisit of the policy? And if so, what would that cost be likely to be?
Obviously, to purchase new machinery, yes, you're correct. We haven't got the machinery to collect the grass. Mulching just works just as good. Picking the grass was perfect, but there will be a cost to purchasing the machinery.
And also, presuming that the question to us was, we would have to move monies from elsewhere or from somewhere else to reintroduce something that's now stopped. But what we, just in terms of the comments made by committee, to get all that on board, everything from signage to the fact this is a pilot, we're taking all that back on board. There are locations in residential areas we'll revisit. That's part of the pilot and learning from it.
Thanks, Mike. I'm mindful of what was already been said about the fact that information about the no-mow may and about reduction and cessation of maintenance in different areas, that was released several times to each councillor. And I'd like to thank those councillors who have proactively engaged with their residents to take responsibility within their ward and who have got in touch with the team and sort of swapped and negotiated where perhaps residents weren't happy. They've decided to look for another area of equal size, and a number of councillors have done that, and it's quite successful. And I think that could be part of the engagement and consultation as we go forward. As a pilot, we're learning from it. It could get better. It could get, and we could feel that we could take more ownership of it the more we engage with it. So I'd like to thank those councillors that have already been doing that from the start. Thank you. Right, so Councillor Berry, you've proposed a motion. Would you like to see if you've got a seconder, and then we can vote on that, and then we could go to mine if that passes, that we don't have to go to mine then.
I'm happy to second that, Chair.
Okay.
So members, could we have all those in favour of Councillor Berry's motion? 2, 3, 4. All those against? 6. Yeah, 6. And any abstentions? 1 abstention. So I think that's lost, Chair.
So thank you. With that not standing, then I'd like to propose that we go with the recommendations in the report with the addition of my third extra one, which I'll read again. Learning from the work in this report, committee requests regular engagement and consultation with communities through their elected members. So that's the recommendations plus a third point. Thank you.
Okay. Members, those in favour of the recommendation that's just been proposed? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think that's you. 10, Chair. And any against? 1. I think that's carried, Chair. No abstentions.
Thank you. So, thank you for that. Thanks. This brings us to item 10, which is found on page 77 to 96 of the agenda pack. And this is the budget monitoring and 22-23 budget process. And I'd like to invite Cher Haywood, who's Director of Resources, to present this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Evening Committee. So this report is follows on from a report that was presented to Policy and Resources Committee on the 17th of March, where the process for the 2021 budget monitoring process, which is this year's budget, and also next year's budget setting process, 22-23, was agreed at Policy and Resources. So the report is part of a suite of reports, which is a consistent report coming to all committees. So it's the same, just to make sure that we can remind members of the process for monitoring the budget for this year and also starting the budget setting process for next year as well. So just in terms of the budget process for this year, 21-22, there will be normal quarterly reports that come through to the committees at the end of each quarter, and this will be starting from April to June. And this will be revenue monitoring, capital monitoring, also the reserves for the committee, which the committee's not actually had before. And I was conscious of the fact that these are pertinent to the committee, so the committee should have oversight of the reserves that are available. Plus also any savings proposals, whether they're on target or whether they need to have any mitigating actions where they are off target, and also any new pressures that materialise through the year as well. And they will come through to the committee for discussion as part of those quarterly monitoring. Just in terms of, we've heard quite a bit of conversation today about MHCLG, and this is really important because, as I mentioned earlier, that one of the parts of the external assurance review by MHCLG will be, apologies, this is the Ministry for Housing, Local Government and Communities. That one of the elements of their report will be good governance and leadership. So it's important that the committee has oversight of all the information pertaining to the budget for this year and for next year, so that if there are any decisions, you are able to make an informed decision. So I just wanted to bring forward an initial indications of what's happening with this year's budget. I wasn't really intending for the committee to have any discussion specifically on the progress so far of this year's budget. And also the items for next year's budget. Because one of the recommendations in the report is that the committee actually recommence the budget workshops that we actually started last year, and that you're able to have an open and full and frank discussion on where there may be potential items that are not being achieved, and also new savings that might come forward for next year's budget. 3.11, I'll just highlight 3.11 in the report. 3.10 down to 3.16 actually provides information and included in Appendix 1 of the savings that relate to the committee. Some of them we've already spoken about today. This just gives you an indication of where those savings are and the achievements for those for the year. And as I say, the intention really is that we take those into the budget workshop and discuss those in the budget workshop. There's a section in the report on zero-based budgeting, and actually recommendation 4 in the report asks for the committee to start within the budget workshops to undertake a process of zero-based budgeting. This recommendation is actually redundant now because at the Policy and Resources Committee on Wednesday last week, the committee agreed that we would have one pilot committee who would start the zero-based budgeting process, undertake that, provide a framework, and then it would be rolled out to all the other committees. And the chair actually volunteered this committee to go second in that process. So rather than each committee simultaneously undertaking a zero-based budgeting, there will be a pilot that will be completed, and then that will be rolled out to the rest of the committees. So that, as I say, recommendation is redundant. And then finally, Chair, in the report, it does provide information in Appendix 3, which are the officer proposals that have come forward as part of the 22-23 budget setting process. And as part of the external financial support, or the capitalisation directive that we were awarded from MHCLG last year, one of the things that we had to provide was a 5-year balanced plan. So at the time, officers actually compiled savings and proposals to go in that plan that was given to MHCLG. And the intention was that officers would then bring them to the budget workshop of the committee, seek the committee's approval as to whether those savings want to go forward, that you would want to take those forward, or indeed you might want to come up with your own savings to take forward, or a hybrid of the two. So one of the recommendations there, Chair, is actually that the budget workshops commence immediately, and that those savings proposals for 22-23 are discussed and considered by the committee as to whether you want to take them forward or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Before I ask for questions, I'm just going to get in here before Simon does and say that when I looked at the report, the first reaction I had was that I wanted a lot more information, a lot more data. But I think you've answered my question simply by referring to the budget workshops. We can ask all those questions and talk at length then, presumably.
Yes, Chair. So each of the proposals will come forward with a lot more information as to how the proposals are made up. That there'll be a summary business case as to how they're made up. And also we'll be providing budget books for the committee workshop as well, so that the committee can actually see how the budget's made up and what the income and expenditure is for each of the functions and the services within the committee.
That sounds great. Thank you very much for that. Thanks, Chair. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Mike?
Thanks, Chair. I noticed you talk about environmental enforcement. Can you explain that a little bit more? I think you'll know the reason for that.
Yes, thank you. So this was part of one of the budget proposals that were agreed at full council on the 1st of March. There was a proposal for savings for environmental enforcement, which in total was 150,000. The recommendation was that the committee actually have delegated authority to come back to decide how the environmental enforcement saving would actually be made. And I understand that there has been some consultation with the committee, some members of the committee about how that's going to be made, and that would come back as part of the budget workshop for the committee's consideration.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Mike.
Again, I'm asking where would that come in then? I presume that's you, Chair, then would know the answer to this?
No, I'm going to ask Chair again if you want to clarify the question.
Yeah, basically, when you say environmental enforcement, what are you talking about, environmental enforcement?
I didn't realise, I thought it was a budget question. So you were actually asking about the enforcement itself. Then Mike's the best person to answer that question.
Chair, so the budget decision taken was to introduce environmental enforcement with an income target. And the difference before the previous arrangements, which we're all familiar with, Kingdom and the zero tolerance approach or robust approach, the Council's enforcement policy has been amended, and so that sort of approach has been taken out. And it's now much more an advisory, discretionary type of approach. That approach has been implemented, so there is now, or soon to be by the end of this month, an internal community warden team that will do high-profile engagement and where required enforcement on things like dog fouling, littering. Covert surveillance is ongoing for fly tipping, and we're also working with businesses on trade waste. Trade waste was the issue that we had problems with, if you recall, a couple of years ago. That's much more about working with the businesses to identify what they need to do in terms of their trade waste. So there's an approach. It's different to the one we had before. As you'll tell me, as councillors, environmental crime arguably is happening more than since the pandemic in terms of things like dog fouling, littering, people dropping their face masks, etc. We talked about as a committee previously. The internal capacity and approach is now being put into place.
What additional cost is that then? Because you're looking for 150,000 savings or income, but what is that going to cost us?
The cost of the community warden team, I understand, is being made through some of the COVID funding, as I understand. It's not my actual service area. I'm not sure where that team was established from.
I don't know off the top of my head, Chair, no, but we can find that information out and come back to you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's important. Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Steve and then Chris.
Yeah, I mean, there's some assumptions in here. One we've dealt with tonight with the car parking, but in Appendix 3, we're predicting, might help Councillor Collins' earlier question, we're predicting, is that 100,000 of camper van income in 2022-23, so next year's budget. If this decision we've made tonight is earlier, will we be able to yield some money in year if we get the scheme up and running?
Yes, I would say so, Chair. I'm not 100%. I know there has been a working group on the camper van income, and there has been a timeline, I think, included within that working group. But absolutely, I mean, for any of these proposals, the sooner we can get started, the sooner we can start realising the savings.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Chair. Chris, you had a question?
Yeah, again, it's going back to environmental enforcement again. As far as I understand, one element of that is in starting to challenge motorists over engine idling. That surely comes under environmental enforcement in form from again. The question was raised, and I think officers came back to us to say nobody had actually been fined. Is that right for that? Whereas probably it's about time they were.
That's correct. I mean, this is an environmental health function, and yet this type of enforcement is very much advisory. So the powers that the officers have got is to approach vehicles that are idling and ask them to turn their engines off, and once they've done that, they've discharged their activity. The Environmental Health are doing activities with transport colleagues about approaches to schools, etc., and education issues, but that isn't, it's not the enforcement you're referring to.
Thanks, Mike.
Mike, can I just clarify that that is actually to do with the legislation at the moment, isn't it? That's not a choice that we're making as a council.
It is, it's the legislation. I understand there are some London authorities that have developed their own bylaw to basically take out non-discretionary enforcement of idling, presumably acute air quality issues in certain boroughs in London. But that's what they've done proactively. Yeah, the legislation, we do what we can with the legislation we've got.
Thanks, Mike. Does anybody else have any questions about this report? Allan.
Yeah, just to carry on about environmental enforcement, in the appendix at the back it says this is amber at present, and options paper to determine how the saving will be made will be presented to the June committee. Well, this, I think, is the June committee.
Yes, I agree. That needs clarifying. Cher.
Yeah, apologies, Chair. I think when I wrote the report originally, I thought that an options paper would come back. As Mike has explained already, there is some work already started and ongoing, to try and generate this income as early on as possible. And we have had the community warden team already in place now, so the work's already started, it's already ongoing, and it's already progressing. So we wouldn't need an options paper to come back because it's already started. That's my fault, sorry, Chair.
Thanks, Cher. Thank you. Mike.
Since it's been mentioned a few times, you're talking about the community warden team. You've actually got a number of other teams within the authority that are used to enforcement. Are they being utilised for that enforcement, or is it just solely the community warden team?
Yep, there are a number of officers who have got experience in enforcement before. We need to utilise that. There are people that haven't got that experience, but perhaps with training in the right places to do that. So it will be a combination of the retained team with people with some delegation, but there are people who work in, for instance, in waste environment. They've got experience that can be used in some kind of multi-activity or multi-agency operation. So yeah, we need to utilise other aspects across the council.
Yeah, to add to that waste team, you've got the community patrol, you've got rangers who are all trained. Have you looked at utilising other outside agencies like the PCSOs who are also trained in environmental crime enforcement?
Yeah, including our incumbent contractors for parking, for instance. What can they do as they're in position? All those things are being considered as part of the work that Chair referred to. But in community patrol, obviously, we've got cameras in key places that could observe with appropriate notification and warning about things being thrown out of cars, for instance. That's something that we're looking at. So-called truckers.
Yeah, as say the PCSOs within the police authority are well trained on it. So that's what I'm saying. Are we utilising our partners for that, or just going to be totally in-house?
No, we will succeed with a wider multi-agency approach, definitely.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks. If there's no more comments, then we can look at the recommendations and note what Cher said, which is that the recommendations 1, 2 and 3 are standing, but recommendation 4 is removed after P&R, the decision at P&R. Is everybody okay with that? So if I move that we agree these recommendations, Steve, second, thank you. Can we agree those by assent? Great, thank you very much. Sorry, this brings us to item 11, which is the Capital and Revenue Budget Monitoring Quarter 4. And again, I'd like to invite Cher Halewood to present this report. Thank you, Cher.
Thank you, Chair. This is a retrospective report which provides the year-end financial position for the committee at the end of last year, which was 2021, which is known as the year-end outturn. So in terms of revenue for the committee, the year-end position was just over £4.43 million overspend. This is made up of a number of areas really. The majority of this area is the loss of the car parking income, which we have debated quite a lot this evening. There's also additional income which we have suffered losses from as a result of COVID, which is developer income and inspection income. And also when we have major capital schemes where we have staff working on those capital schemes, we charge the staff to the capital schemes, and we're able to make some savings within the revenue budget for that. And again, as a result of COVID-19, where all business as usual activity was paused for just under 12 months of the year, some of those capital schemes have not progressed and not gone ahead in some areas, so we've not been able to charge the capital salaries to that. Now, just in terms of the overall overspend, this is taken as a portion of the whole council overspend, and we're just finalising that total council overspend now, and that will be brought to Policy and Resources Committee on the 30th of June. Members will remember that we have been formally awarded a capitalisation direction for last year, 2021, of up to 9 million, which is actually the government is allowing us to borrow to actually offset this overspend, because we're not allowed to present a non-balanced budget. This is only specifically, again, I mentioned earlier, related to the pressures as a result of COVID. So anything that where we have overspends within the year that were not COVID related, we have to offset those by other means. So at the end of the year, we were just over £4.3 million overspend, and that proportion will be part of the council's overall borrowing costs for revenue. Just in terms of capital, there was a table at 3.3 in terms of capital there. At the start of the year, the original capital programme was almost 22 million for the committee. There has been some revisions in year as we've received some additional grant funding related to highways and cycleways. So that's actually increased the value of the capital programme for this year. And at the end of the year, it was slightly under budget. So we managed to spend just under 19 million in terms of that capital programme, and the variance was just under 8 million. And again, the rationale for that is just because of the capacity of the officers in dealing with the emergency pandemic and not been spending as much of their time as they would have liked on business as usual and being able to deliver the capital projects. So thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Does anybody have any questions about this? Steve?
Thank you. I'm trying to look through, and the reason I'm asking the question is obviously because I sit on the Transport Committee for City Region, and we didn't increase the levy, which netted us a saving of £468,000. When will that have fed through into the figures? Because it doesn't jump out at me. I've looked at 2 or 3 times. So when would that feed into the? I'm just highlighting the fact that there is good reason why we have people on the Transport Committee, although it was some people don't think it's important. We did save £468,000, which was mitigated a lot of the cuts. But when will that feed through?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Foulkes. So the Mersey Travel Levy is set just before the budget's set in March each year. So around about February, the levy is actually set. So for this year, which is actually last year's report, the Mersey Travel Levy would have been set in February 2020. Just trying to think of working in 3 consecutive years. And that was set and that was frozen for the year 2020-21 last year. So actually, the budget were balanced for the Mersey Travel Levy for that. The saving that you're talking about actually relates to this year, 21-22. So as a result of the levy being frozen, we had assumed that it would be increased for this year, 21-22. And again, as a result of it being frozen, we were able to take a saving in the budget for this year, which has offset some of our pressures, which meant we didn't have to make additional savings to offset that.
Thanks, Chair. Simon.
Chair, thank you. Director, hi, good evening. You started that element of your report with a large percentage of the deficit is due to car parking loss. Earlier on this evening, I think you mentioned that we're in receipt of a grant of quite a large proportion of. What was the proportion that we get back, and therefore does that figure stack up? Is that right?
So this is the total of the losses for car parking for all of the income for this committee. You're right. When the report comes, and I appreciate you haven't seen this, but when the report comes to Policy and Resources, which provides information as of the whole position for the whole council for last year, in the report, the compensation we get back for lost fees and charges from the government is accounted for as a whole rather than each individual committee. So there's around about 11 million of income that we've received from the government to support our lost income as part of the compensation scheme. In terms of the percentage and the proportionment of that, so the council have to offset the first 5% of any losses, and then it can claim back 75%. So I think the figures, I've actually written it down here from earlier on. Originally we have around about 16 million, I think, which was our income that we were to generate across the whole authority of eligible income. So not all of the income we're allowed to claim back as part of the compensation scheme. It's only eligible income. And of that 16 million, we've been able to claim just over 11 million pounds back. So of this proportion here, of the total income, I haven't got the exact figure. I mean, I could probably work it out, but I haven't got the exact figure. But it will be, the first 5% will be offset, and then we're able to claim 75% of that back. But the reason it's shown as an overspend here, as I said, is because we actually show the whole income receivable from the government as a total, sort of off the bottom line of the total council overspend figure, which I appreciate you haven't got, but it will come to P&R at the end of the month.
Thank you. So we got £11 million. Where is £11 million allocated then internally here if it's not allocated to us?
No, it's allocated centrally. So it's to show each committee really what the impact of COVID was. We haven't netted off the total income compensation via each committee. We have to submit a return through to the government every month, and then the government pay us in one lump sum. And what we haven't done is allocated that out back to each committee. We could do that. We haven't got that for those figures at the moment, but we actually could do that. And we could bring that to Policy and Resources in June, so you could actually see that by the individual committee.
Yes. You see, therefore, if £11 million was paid back to us for lack of car parking income, the discussion that we had this evening, it doesn't have to be allocated across the council. Clearly, it can be allocated where it's to do with car parking. The £11 million
can I
pounds
stop
that we
there?
were.
The 11 million was not just about car parking. That was in total, wasn't it?
Yes, it was for all. The 11 million was all of the council's income that it lost as a result of COVID-19.
And sorry, you said at the beginning of your presentation the majority was car parking.
Yeah, sorry. In this report here, the overspend for the committee is 4.3 million. The majority of that overspend, just for this committee, was as a result of car parking. So around about it was just under half really. So around about 2 million was specifically related to the loss of car parking income, just for this committee. But as a council as a whole, our accumulated losses for sales fees and charges was around about 16 million. And we've got £11 million of that back from the government.
Thank you.
A proportion of that would be for car parking, yeah. Apologies, I wasn't clearer there.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Chair. I think just to clarify, in my mind, Chair, you're saying that we lost approximately 16 million with our COVID costs, and the government reimbursed us 75% of 95%, and that would equate to about 11 million across the council. And in terms of this committee, we're looking at about 2 million losses from car parking charges?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. And in return, we wouldn't get that in its entirety back, even if we could claim it all as COVID costs, which I don't think we can because of the months when the parking charges were suspended. So we can only claim it during certain set periods of time, and that was 75% of 95% of those few months in which we could actually claim. So we certainly couldn't at any point hope to claim back all our the money that we lost through suspending car parking charges. Is that right?
That's correct, yes, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair. Steve?
That was it, the point I was going to make. There was a period when we didn't re-implement car parking charges when other councils did, and the government deemed that we would not acting irresponsibly, but he said that was your choice. We're not going to compensate you anything for that period as well. So there was a bit of a double whammy there for us.
Thanks, Steve. Yes. Are there any other questions about this? No? Sorry, Chris and then Mike. Thanks. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We're talking about smaller figures here, I'm pretty sure, but on page 100, 3.28, reference to garden waste service achieving the target of 40,000 subscribers, which strikes me as quite impressive, given the difficult conditions the service has been operating under over the last year or so. Now, I had it confirmed today with one of the tree officers that residents who take up this service have been offered a whip, a tree. And I'm just wondering, and I heard that it's been successful, to how it's successful. That's the first question. How many have taken it up? If anybody knows, that's one of the officers can quote the figures. And also, is that funded through a grant scheme rather than coming out of the profit, generated, the revenue generated through the service? So.
Yes, we took the decision this year to pilot, or rather, sorry, last subscription year to pilot in a targeted way to see how it would operate, giving trees away to subscribers as part of the subscription. And we're talking about a small, immature tree nonetheless, but the logistics, well, we obviously wanted to be fair and equitable. That was a pilot, so we chose a certain area, and I understand the take-up was good, so really positive. So the pilot worked. The challenge to us obviously is to replicate that into some kind of any 40,000 people being offered a tree obviously helps with our targets, but it's a logistic challenge. It may be that we have some kind of distribution centre and invite people to come and collect a tree, but that is the intention, and it comes through the income that we generate. Purchase trees.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.
Mike?
You might as well sit back down, Mike. It's a question about brown bins for you. Again, you reached the 40,000 subscribers, but I've had a number of phone calls from residents who found it very, very difficult to actually re-up their subscription, because they used to pay by cheque, they used to go to the to the one-stop shops, and I understand that we can't do that, but they have tried to do it by cheque. Some of the generation people I've been speaking to don't use debit cards or credit cards, they only use the chequebook, but they can't pay by cheque. Now, have we lost any people that way, or can we look at least for this next year or so to give that option to them until we get through COVID, because we're not out the woods yet?
Yeah, to be frank, yeah, the purchase through cheque is increasingly difficult. It's a smaller number, but it's an important number, as you say, as you imply. It's a vulnerable group of the community we need to keep serving. So the core position on that, there is a core position on it, so we're working on that. I can update you on that. I'm not sure of anyone being turned away. The position that started last year is that we introduced direct debit, and of the 40,000 people that have subscribed, over 10,000 in the first year have taken that up. So the good thing for them, and the thing that makes it easier for us all, is that you now opt out, so you will automatically, your direct debit will continue. Some people have felt that they didn't understand that, but we've clarified that with a few people have said that. But basically, the direct debit has made things easier. That big profile we have in May when people resubscribe makes things easier. But you're right, there's a small cohort that we need to work with who find the new modern way of paying, etc., difficult. They're not in the hundreds, but they're individuals we need to work with.
Thanks, Mike. That was a good question. Thank you. And thanks, Mike, for your answer. Any other comments or questions? No. So we'll look at the recommendation, which is that the Environment, Climate Emergency and Transport Committee is requested to note the year-end revenue outturn position of 4.345 million adverse and the performance of the capital programme as reported at Q4, April to March of 2021. If I propose that we agree that recommendation. Seconded, thank you. Agreed? Thank you very much. Thank you. This brings us to item 12, which is the appointment of panels, statutory and advisory committees and working parties 21-22. And this can be found on pages 105 to 112 of the agenda pack. And I'd like to invite Vicky Shaw, Head of Legal Services, to present this report. Thanks, Vicky.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report, members, is to enable the committee to review the continuing need for various advisory committees and working parties, and to appoint members and deputies to serve on those for the current municipal year. This report relates to two advisory committees, the Active Travel Forum and the Wirral Climate Change Group, which is now known as the Cool Wirral Partnership. Neither of these bodies are statutory, but they are considered to be good practice for an authority to have these as a mechanism for engaging with stakeholders. Last year, I understand that the Active Travel Forum had 4 members on it, 1 from each group represented on the committee, and the Cool Wirral Partnership had 5 members on it last year, which was, I think, 1 from each of the political groups on the council. So members are asked to requested to confirm whether they wish to retain these bodies for this municipal year and to authorise the monitoring officer to appoint members to those bodies in accordance with the wishes of the group leaders.
Thanks, Vicky. Thank you. Do we have any comments or questions on that? No? I recommend both of those, the Active Travel Forum and the Cool Wirral Partnership, the Wirral Climate Change Group. They're both hugely important, and I would be very sorry to see them go. I think they've been incredibly good for Wirral. So if nobody's got anything else to add, I'll move to the recommendations then. So that's the committee is requested to authorise the monitoring officer as proper officer to carry out the wishes of the group leaders in allocating members to membership of the Active Travel Forum and the Wirral Climate Change Group, to appoint those members with effect from the date at which the proper officer is advised of the names of such members. I propose that. Do we have a seconder? Is that you, Mike? Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Thanks for that. And we agree by assent? Thank you. Thanks. This brings us to a similar agenda item, which is number 13, which is found on page 113 to 120, and this is the appointments to Wirral Flood and Water Management Partnership. And again, I'd like to invite Vicky Shaw to present this report. Thanks, Vicky.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, again, members, the purpose of this report is to enable the committee to appoint members and deputies to the Wirral Flood and Water Partnership for this municipal year. The main purpose of the partnership is to achieve, through joint working and effective management of flooding and coastal erosion incidents on Wirral, to take collective measures in order to minimise the potential impact of such incidents and to seek the implementation of more permanent and sustainable solutions to the mitigation or alleviation of flood and coastal erosion. The partnership will also establish a formal link with the Council's overview and scrutiny function to provide elected member oversight of local flood and coastal erosion risk management activities. In the past, when we were operating under the previous governance model, the Cabinet member and 3 members of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee were appointed to this particular organisation. It may be that members would be content to continue with 4 members from the committee for this particular partnership. So the committee again is basically requested to authorise the monitoring officer to carry out the wishes of the political group leaders in allocating members to membership of the partnership.
Thanks, Vicky. Any questions or comments about that? No? I'd like to just point out at this point, I think it's very, very important that each party takes part in that particular committee. That's going to be very, very important, that we have political representation from all parties there and we work as collaboratively as possible. I'll move straight to the recommendations then if nobody's got anything to say. The committee is requested to authorise the monitoring officer as proper officer to carry out the wishes of the political group leaders in allocating members to membership of the Wirral Flood and Water Partnership and to appoint those members with effect from the date at which the proper officer is advised of the names of such members. I propose that. Do I have a seconder? Seconded. Thank you, thanks. Can we agree by assent? Great. Thank you very much. So finally, this brings us to the work programme update. This is agenda item 14 and can be found on pages 121 to 128. And I'm not necessarily going, there's no report to present, there's just the work programme itself. There is an issue with it which I did refer to in the section on the minutes, because if you look closely at the minutes, you will have noticed that the minutes of the last meeting in March, we had a vote in the last 5 minutes of that epic meeting in which we noted the active travel content of the work programme, and we noted it and requested that it stay in our work programme. And the eagle-eyed amongst you might have noticed that it's not in our work programme, and so clearly that needs to be clarified. So I've arranged a meeting with the council leader, myself as chair of this committee to represent your wishes, and the chair of the Economy, Regen and Development Committee. We both straddle active travel, and I think it's causing some confusion. So with the directors and with the chairs and with the leader of the council, we're going to put our heads together and work out whether the terms of reference might need clarifying there. And so that's the only comment that I had regarding the minutes, not necessarily matching the work programme. I also had a few additional items small items which I wanted to add to the work programme. But before I add mine, can I just check if anybody else has got any comments or requests? Steve?
Yes, Chair. I remember last year when we awarded the new tree contract to Mancoed, is it? We did request as a committee that there be some sort of qualitative presentation sometime into the contract, if you remember. So if we could just schedule that in for a convenient time for, once the contract's had time, things about how it'd be nice to see how a decision is made to take a tree down and what processes to go through, how many we've had to take down, what the reasons were, just how the contract's perform, and now we've awarded it. And I think committee did agree that, so if that can go in the work programme.
Thank you. Yes, we did agree with that, so that I agree with that. Anybody else got anything that they wish to add to the work programme? Chris?
It's not actually that, it's just in relation to what Councillor Steve Foulkes said, monitoring the work of Mancoed. Of course, we know that it's the council officers themselves, the extended tree officer team of 6 individuals now. I'm and one of my colleagues were taken down to Thorntonhough Green to actually watch the new Obosonic machine in action, saving the council money and also saving trees, because they demonstrated how it actually, is able to ascertain the health of a tree internally through its very clever technology. So I really just wanted to mention that, and also, to congratulate the tree team for being so to engaging with the council officers who've shown an interest in tree management to such an extent. And they repeated that point of, the fact that they're in charge of the tree assessments and that they are calling the shots, and make it clear to Mancoed that they are the ones who are just carrying out the work that's commissioned by them. Yeah, so just make that point. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. That is an important point. Anybody else got anything that they would like to comment on or add? Sorry, Helen.
First time here. I just want to recommend that this committee celebrates and supports the work of the litter pickers across the Wirral. There's thousands of people who've gone out and done incredible work over the last 18 months. And I believe that we, at the committee linked to this work should celebrate it. And I'd like to know how the council supports it as well, because as a litter picker, newly made litter picker, I know that there's a fine machine behind that. If we go on a pick, there's a team that comes up and picks up, like magic, picks the bins, the litter up. So I want some way of recognising that work across Wirral.
I think that that's an excellent point. They are doing an amazing piece of work across the whole of Wirral, all the different litter pickers. I agree with that. Is that okay with everybody else? Any comments?
Yes, Chair, sorry, could we take that a little bit? Because
I haven't.
Do you have?
Yeah,
thank you.
More. I've got a few more points to add to that. I wanted to go back to that. I'd like an update on road safety strategy and our road safety recommendations that we made as a working group at some point soon, if that's okay. So I'd like to add that to the work programme. I'd also like to see that the No Mow May review, I'd like an update on that as soon as possible. I'm assuming that will have happened by the next committee meeting. That would be great if we could have a review, an update on that. Steve's point on Mancoed, I think, needs to go into the work programme. And I'd like an update on the great work that I know that's happening with recycling and upcycling. If we can we've already had updates on these things, but it only have to be really small. I just think they need to be regular. So a mini update on each of these would be great. And of course, we've got the active travel items, which I'd like to see back on the agenda. Helen's point about the update on the collaboration between the council and all the different litter picking groups, for example, the Wirral Wombles. We do need to celebrate their work. It's fantastic, and it would be good to find out a bit more about that. So I would like to see that on the agenda as well. If nobody has anything else to add, Simon.
Dog fouling, please.
Dog fouling is on the work programme, I think. Yes, it is. Okay. Does anybody have anything else to add?
Chair, we're looking at dog fouling strategy. Can we take out the dog control PSPO? I think there's a lot going on, and that is probably going to be not really needed if we've got a good dog fouling strategy.
Nice try. If it's on the work programme, it would be really good to find out where we're up to in that, and we could debate that at the time, whether we remove it or not, but we can't just decide to remove it at this point. That would be we'd need the information and we'd need to vote on that. So,
well, if we're adding to it, surely we can take away.
Yeah, but we've already discussed it previously at previous meetings to put that in there, so that's why that's in there. But thank you, thanks for that. Simon?
Just a question. I fully agree that litter pickers don't get enough. They must save us money on broken equipment and all sorts. And your thoughts on how we might progress that briefly? Because I think that should be recognised in some way.
Sorry, the litter picking, I think Helen's already proposed that we put that in the agenda to discuss.
I'm talking about actually recognising litter pickers.
Yeah, so we could invite them into some of the groups in to talk, or they could send a report to us. There's a lot of different ways that we could do that.
Can I leave that with you to?
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. That's why I agreed.
Perhaps we could liaise with the mayor as well, and the mayor could go and visit them or invite them in whenever is virtual parlour or something like that.
I think that would be a really good idea. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Simon. Just turn myself off. Can we go to the recommendations to we're basically to look at the work programme and agree the work programme with those additional items? Is that okay? If I propose that we agree the work programme as it stands plus those additional items. So if I propose that, thanks very much. Can we agree that by assent? Brilliant. Thank you very much. So that brings us to the end of the meeting. And before we close, I'd really like to thank the elected members for their patience and hard work in what was a very, very potentially very stressful situation, having to make such difficult decisions on behalf of Wirral residents. And I'd also like to thank the council officers for their patience in presenting these reports and in waiting patiently to present these reports. And I'd like to thank those people who managed to watch it, if they still made it to the end and they're still here. Thank you very much.